I really wanted to get on the record that there were some really good things about our family life. Um, there was a lot of love between my brothers and sisters and myself, and we had some good moments with my parents, but by and large my memory of my relationship with especially my dad is that it was largely very strained, very violent. I was never comfortable when he was around. I used to run to get up the hill from the school so I could see our house, to see whether his car was there or not, and hoping that it wouldn't be. He was away a lot because he was a traveling salesman, but it was inevitable that when he was home there was huge tension and always the possibility of violence. Some really terrific beatings which nowadays would have landed him in jail. It was, there were so many. I lived with a level of anxiety whenever he was home that it just was obsessive. I couldn't ride comfortable with the knowledge that every time I got home I was going to have to face him and his moods, his violence, his demands, his lectures. He loved standing me up and he would say, "Look me in the eye," and then he would proceed to lecture me for, sometimes it would go on for an hour or more than an hour. And I still remember some of those lectures. I remember once when he got on the subject of sex. I don't know why that came up. I was probably about 15 or 16, and I certainly wasn't about to be sexually active. But he felt it his duty to warn me, about the pitfalls of sexuality. In his life, he was sexually frustrated. He didn't understand that women have a sexual appetite. He thought that women were weaker vessels. That was a phrase that was bandied around in the church, and that it was their job to cater to men's needs, and also he saw them through the eyes of the myth of Eve and the Garden of Eden, the fact that she had tempted Adam, and because of that mankind had fallen. And so he used to give me these lectures. I mean, a number of times he gave me these lectures on sexuality, and fundamentally the primary theme was always that if you let yourself get tempted, then women will have control of you, that you will be so obsessed with sex that you won't be able to make independent decisions. You'll be trapped by some woman. And he would reduce himself to a slobbering kind of
slavering.
Slavering, yeah, that's the better word. But it was slobbering too. It was so bad.
Oh boy!
And he'd be, like 3 feet away from me, in my face, telling me that if I ever succumbed to the temptation, that I would be completely in the hands of the devil. And I was, as the years went by and I did become sexually active, I used to wonder what happened, like somehow it never quite achieved those levels of ecstasy and control that he seemed to think was inevitable once you got involved with sex.
He was watching too many of those 20s silent movies.
I think. He never watched any movies, but his imagination was so active, and I could only assume later that it was because his sex never rose to that level, and that he was talking about a wish fulfillment fantasy. Anyway, I guess the thing that mostly affected my relationship with him, and I think caused a lot of damage in my psyche, was the belief that obedience, that I owed him obedience, and that no matter what he said or did, because he was my father, that was right, and that was my duty to listen to him and to put it into effect. And there were certain themes that just kept recurring in my life from the time I reached puberty until I finally got old enough to get out from under his control. One of them was that there was that obedience required, and that he had the right and I had the obligation to let him tell me how I was going to spend the rest of my life, you know. I didn't have any particular interest in being a doctor, but he was obsessed with the idea. From the time I remember, when he realized I was intelligent and able to get good marks in school, he started dreaming that I was going to be a doctor. And it wasn't because I was going to help mankind or because it would be a rewarding profession. It was always because, number one, during the Depression, doctors were the only ones that had money. And number two, doctors always had jobs and prestige. And for him, that was what a good job was. I think he probably had the intelligence to have had a career somewhere. He certainly could have been a singer, but he never had the opportunity to develop anything. Partly, he went to agriculture college, and about the second or third month, his dad was called on a mission, went off to the States on a mission, and his older brother came and said, "Clive, you got to come and run the farm." And so he dropped out of school, and he could have, that could have been the key for him to get into some profession that was rewarding. But it went by the board. By the time he had control over his own life at all, it was too late, and he ended up, he was a good salesman in some ways, but he never made a lot of money. He always was on the verge of being broke. And my mother was, she was the worst kind of wife to have in those circumstances. She was so pessimistic, you know. And I remember watching... Delilah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Isn't that... I never thought of that, but that is incredible.
I was just identifying.
He would come home from a week on the road and talk about his prospects. He rarely had enough sales to be significant or to be comforting, but he always had a lot of prospects. And he would describe these prospects, try to convince my mother that we weren't going to starve to death, and my mother was absolutely convinced that we were going to starve to death. And then it was so depressing to listen to this.
Well, like, give me an example of what she might say.
Well, she would say, "Prospects? You can't eat prospects. You can't pay the bills with prospects." Which, of course, is quite true. But at that point, he certainly didn't need to be reminded of that, because he had to jack himself up to that false optimism in order to come into the house. It was, it was kind of sad when I think about it. And well, it was sad at the time. I hated it. It really worried me. And I grew up with the feeling that I was going to, you know, I had prospects, but I was going to someday end up on the street, desperately poor. And when I left the university, my mother, every time I saw her, within a few minutes, she would say, "Are you sorry yet that you left the university?" And it wasn't because I'd left this, you know, this world of ideas and a chance to really do great things to the world. It was because I no longer was secure.
Well, at least she didn't ask you for a piece of bread.
No.
You told me a couple of great stories about your dad. One, him telling a dirty joke,
Oh,
hearing
yeah.
a dirty joke, and the other one, he'd sit in his car on Main Street in Cardston and wait for people to come by.
Yes.
Okay, tell those.
Well, he was essentially a very sociable man, and yet they didn't have any friends, partly because he was gone most of the time, and we were poor. And he really, I think deep down inside, he bought into that notion that somehow, if you're righteous, God will bless you with material things. And we weren't exactly blessed with material things. We weren't starving, but he was always sort of on the brink of being broke, you know, and I'm sure over the years that really weighed heavily on him. Anyway, one of the things he used to do, we went on a lot of camping trips, and he would always, we would work, get up early, you know, get everything ready, get the car packed, and then he would say, "Well, I've got to just run downtown and get the oil changed." And he would go, and 4 or 5 hours later, "Where is Dad?" And I'd get on my bike and ride downtown, and he'd be sitting on Main Street with somebody in the car that he was talking to, and totally oblivious to time and you know, any promises or any obligations to the family. Used to just make me so mad. I just wanted to smack him. But of course, Dad wasn't somebody that you even dared express criticism
He was
to.
a powerful Leo.
Yeah,
man,
he was powerful. And he was physically powerful. He wasn't a huge man, but he was strong as a bull. I remember the summer I got out of high school, I went to work for a construction company in camp. We were building canal drops, and because I was going to university, of course, I had to deal with a lot of flack from these guys, most of whom were not particularly educated and had a lot of energy in bad-mouthing anybody who was educated or was going to be educated. Anyway, so I ended up having to fight some of them. And I discovered, to my amazement, because, you know, I was not really a fighter, but it turned out that I was tougher than any of them. I arm wrestled every guy in camp and beat him easily. And I got the idea that I was really something, you know. So when I got home, I challenged my dad to an arm wrestle, and we were sitting at the supper table, and Dad said, "Well, all right." So he gets his arm up there, and he just kept on eating, you know. And I took his arm, and I went to push, and he just put me down like that, without even an effort. It was the most amazing thing. Well, you can see, you know, from the picture that this is a guy who was in control of his family. First of all, he was in control of his wife, and he was also, you know, he had complete control of his kids. And no matter what I said about what I might be interested in doing with my life, I was going to be a doctor. And I don't know why I put up with it, because from the beginning I financed myself. I got a $500 scholarship, and I saved $500 by working my ass off in a construction camp. And with that $1,000, I paid for my whole first year of university. but I was in me pre-med. It all fell apart in my second year. You know, Dad got to be manager of a cookware, stainless steel cookware company that was putting its product on the market, and he demanded that I be one of his salesmen. And I don't know why I didn't resist stronger. At that point, I guess I hadn't come to terms with the fact that I didn't need to be controlled by him. And anyway, I became a salesman that summer, and I hated that job. I hated it in every respect. It was just the opposite to what I would have given me satisfaction. For one thing, I had to travel every weekend about 350 miles on gravel roads into Saskatchewan. And then I was there, and I couldn't afford to stay in hotels, so I was camping out and being harassed by the police constantly. And I was wrestling with my distaste for what I was doing every day, until finally I couldn't stand it, and I would force myself to go into town and find some poor working girl and convince her that if she didn't buy our stainless steel, she would forever be a second-rate wife, you know. And I mean, I had modest success considering how much I hated it, but I got talked into doing it, or essentially forced into doing it by my dad. And then criticized by him because I wasn't as hugely successful as he thought I should be.